I'm Shannon Thrasher, and this is 30-Second Tactics. Today, like the video title says, we're going to talk about cop guns of the 90s. Now, this is not a complete list, obviously, and some guns were carried in the 80s into the 90s. Some guns were, it is what it is. It's just a fun overview of them. So the first one we're going to talk about is revolvers, and the fact that if you were policing in the 90s, there were still a lot of revolvers out there. One of the most popular back then was the Smith & Wesson 686. That's what this is here. It's a 357, which you probably know you can also shoot 38s in. There were tons of revolvers out there, and there were tons of revolvers still in cop holsters well into the 90s. Just because automatics were available, automatics have essentially always been available. The 1911, of course, is named that because it's been around since 1911. The Browning High Power, another automatic that's seen a lot of use in police and military, came out in 1935. So there were a lot of automatics out there, but for whatever reasons, it did take law enforcement quite a while to switch over almost exclusively to automatics. And I would say now, to see a revolver in a duty holster now would be almost unheard of. There might be some somewhere. But this is one example. Of course, they were 6 shots. They used speed loaders. They're great guns. Self-defense or law enforcement gun, it's great. The only limitation it has, of course, compared to modern guns, is going to be your ammunition capacity. So that's one. I have another example of a revolver here. This is a Ruger GP100. You can tell they're basically the same gun, just a different brand, a Ford versus Chevy kind of thing. Colts were also very popular at the time. The general consensus back then was the Colt was the best built gun, but because of that, the tolerances are tighter and stuff, it would possibly, and I'm not trying to pick on Colt, but it could possibly be more subject to malfunctions with little bits of dirt or specks of whatever. And the Ruger was considered the most durable, the toughest, you'll never break it. And the Smith & Wesson kind of fell in between those two. So that's why, in my opinion anyway, most guys back then that were carrying revolvers were carrying the Smith. Now you notice the 686, which the blued version of that would be the 586, and the Ruger here are both stainless steel guns. Well, back in the 80s and 90s, the technology, the metallurgy, all the coatings and stuff they put on guns today wasn't quite as good as it is now. Now every gun out there, every top gun you can mention Smith & Wesson or HK or Walther or Glock, and I could go on and on. Anything that's making a duty gun nowadays has one of these super wazoo finishes that they throw them out in the yard and put salt water on them for a week and they're fine. Back then that wasn't the case. If you had a blued gun and you worked out in the weather, it's a good chance your gun was going to get rusty if you didn't keep real good maintenance on it. So stainless steel guns were a common thing back then for that reason. All right, so another very common gun in law enforcement in the 90s was the Beretta, the what's known as the 92FS. It's the one the military adopted, and it's the exact same gun. They just call it the M9 because the military has to put a number on everything, I guess. And it was 9mm, so M9 was pretty creative. But this is a super popular gun. LAPD adopted this gun, I want to say 1985. And, of course, the bigger departments like that, LAPD, smaller departments will always look to them for what to do. They've already done the research or the trials and such. So this was a super popular gun in the late 80s, early 90s. It was not at all rare to see a cop carrying one of these. Now, if you compare this to a modern gun, again, 1985 to now is what, 35 years, 36 years, something like that. But the only change you're going to see, the only practical change you're going to see now, of course, there's a lot of polymer guns, this aluminum frame gun, is that everything that comes out now has got a light rail. Now, back then in the late 80s, early 90s, the only thing you could find a factory light rail on was the Glock. And we're going to talk about the Glock in a minute. But now, if you buy a Beretta now, you can get one with a light rail, whatever gun you're talking about. Again, super popular. All the 80s cop movies, they're toting these. Of course, Lethal Weapon makes it very popular. It was 15 shot. Now I think they come with standard 17 round mags. But 9mm, they did make them in 40. The standard one like this was the safety decocker. And again, we'll just double check this gun's clear. So it's a double action, single action, meaning the first time you pull the trigger, you're doing all the work to bring the hammer back. After that first shot and the slide racks, it's going to be single action. After that, it's a lighter trigger pull. The idea behind that was it was a safety feature in that you didn't accidentally pull that first shot off. But once you got that first shot off, you're in a shootout. Let's get the rest of them off as fast as we can. And so it defaulted to a single action trigger. Now, when you're done shooting with that, what do you do with that? Well, you could do this little thing right here, which is super dangerous, or you just hit the decocker. Now, this one in its original configuration, the decocker and the safety are one and the same. So once you decocked it, you'd have to take it back off safety before you fired it. They also made them that were double action only, where it basically fired like a revolver every time it's the full trigger pull. They also made them with the decock would pop right back up, or is a decock only, but this was the standard model that you'd see most cops carrying. All right, another very popular gun in the 80s and 90s was the Smith & Wesson automatics. This is a 5906. This was the most common of the common. Now, they had these in 40, and they had them in 45, and they had them with aluminum frames and steel frames and double action only. This, again, is the standard. It was a 15-shot 9mm. It's an all-steel gun. It's a pretty heavy gun by today's standards. Of course, heavier gun, lower recoil. So it's a trade-off. This is also a double action, single action gun with a decocking safety, just like the Beretta. Okay, you can fire it. You're done firing. You don't want to drop the hammer by hand because that's dangerous. You just hit the safety. Now, one thing I didn't mention, the Beretta and the Smith have ambidextrous safety. So if you're a left-handed shooter, no problem. Same thing, right? So, very cool gun, very, very prevalent gun in the 90s. Kind of a brick. You can't tell on video, but for the size of this gun it's a pretty heavy gun. It's all steel gun. And again, back in the 90s, you wouldn't found a light rail on here. Now you can buy, a Smith & Wesson automatic like an M&P or something today. It's definitely going to come with a light rail. You're going to have trouble finding one that doesn't have a light rail. All right. So another thing that was not super common, but around in the 80s and 90s was 1911s. There were still guys carrying the single action 45s. Now, the difference back then, before Kimber and some other companies started making all the Super Wazoo stuff, is you basically got this. You got the standard old, and this one even has nicer sights than some of them did back then. You had basically a GI model where it looked like an army gun. It didn't have a nice beaver tail. It would bite you sometimes. It didn't have a fancy trigger or a fancy hammer. It was a basic gun, and it was a 7-shot 45. Some guys loved it, and they rocked on. Now, one thing you did have as an option, in the 90s, there was a company out of Canada called Ordinance, and this company said, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we could rock those 1911s, but we had twice as much ammo? So Ordinance started out just making frames. They were a company that just made frames. You'd buy the frame, you'd put yours or someone else's, or parts top end of the 1911 on it, and now you have a 14-shot 1911. Now, this gun is essentially 100% 1911, except as it relates to the magazine. It uses a double-stacked 14-round magazine. And remember, everything out there is, 14, 15, 17, 18 nowadays. But back in the 90s, having a high-capacity 1911 or high-capacity 45 in general, you didn't have a lot of choices. You could run a Glock, which back then there was actually a lot of hate on Glocks. Guys, departments still didn't, accept the whole no external safety and polymer guns and all that stuff. So if you wanted a steel gun in 45 with a high capacity, you basically had one option, and that was the Ordinance. Super high quality guns. Oh, I kind of skipped over. After a couple of years of making the frames, they were so successful, they started building entire guns. And again, you could get them in blue or stainless. And again, stainless guns in the 90s were very common. The only drawback with this gun, because they were very high quality guns, but because of the extra wide grip, sometimes what you would have is your magazine release. You got to put this in, say, the gun locker before you go in the booking room. And if you set it on this side, if you'll notice right there, just a little bit of weight, and that's going to activate your magazine release. So cops that carried these, had gotten the habit of always laying them down with the magazine release up. Just a little quirk of this gun. But awesome gun if you wanted a high capacity 45 in the 90s. Again, no light rail because we're in the 90s. So the last one we're going to talk about is the Glock. Now, Glocks kind of took a while to get popular. Glocks came out in the early 80s as a military gun made in Austria. They came to America pretty quick. By the late 80s, early 90s, they still weren't super popular. But they were the only game in town when you were talking about a light rail. Not the only one. There were a few, like the HK USP had a light rail, but it was a proprietary rail. You had to buy the HK light to fit it. So as far as a standardized light rail, and I'll call it a light rail, they call it accessory rail, but you know, you can get everything from a laser to a bayonet to put on this rail, but to me, it's a light rail. Put a light on it or leave it alone. So that's a quick look at them. We're going to set up on the range here in just a sec and shoot them real quick for you. All right, we're on the range. We'll shoot these guns we just got done talking about, and I'll just shoot them in the same order we talked about them. So first one will be the Smith 686. And again, double action, single action. I'm just going to run it double action because I think that's how a defense gun should be ran. And this ain't my gun, and apparently sights are a little low for me. But you know it's live TV, right? Okay. And now the Ruger GP100. There you go. I redeemed myself. And let's see. We'll go with the Beretta. Oh, hold on. One of our plates didn't go up. I need an intern just to pull plate racks for me. And the Smith, again, double act. Whoop, gotta pull the plate rack. Getting in my head of myself, guys. Go with your Grandpappy's 1911 here, which is probably going to bite my finger pretty good without the beaver tail. The pair of Ordinance. Whoop, again, I keep forgetting to set up the plates. This is good video for you guys here. Get to watch me practice putting up plates. I remember this time. And lastly, we'll run the Glock. All right, so what does that prove? Nothing. I don't know. I like to shoot guns. You guys like to watch me shoot guns. Like I said, other than, of course, the revolvers are kind of obsolescent, if not obsolete. But the automatics here, other than the fact they don't have light rails, have we made any great strides in the last 35 years, 30 years? I don't know. If that's all you have, or if you're on a department that issues you one of these guns, like I said, other than the fact that you're not running a light rail, which is real common today, and also not going to be able to run a red dot, which is becoming more common, they're still pretty cool. So hope you guys enjoyed this video. As always, subscribe, hit the like button, hit the bell, share the videos. Get down in the comments, tell me what you want to see for future videos, guys. So as always, work, train, repeat. Stay safe.